a charitable sales promotion really is about branding, recognition for both the charity and the for-profit. It's to boost sales for the for-profit. It's to boost donations to the charity and awareness for their cause. So it's really a win-win all the way around. But at the same time, you don't want to be promoting the product or service that the for-profit is they're selling simply because they've engaged in a commercial co-venture agreement or charitable sales promotion with your organization.
You are listening to Power Marketing with Kevin Lee. Kevin and his agency Did It have helped thousands of businesses win through superior marketing, as have his books, articles, speaking engagements, and the E-Marketing Association Power Marketing podcasts. Here's Kevin.
Today I'm joined by Ron Barrett, who's the VP of Nonprofit Services at Cogency Global. And that may not be a household name to a lot of folks. So we'll start off with having you describe what your division does at Cogency, which of course has many things beyond just the nonprofit levels of services. But as it relates to nonprofits, why don't you describe what Cogency provides?
Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate being here today. So my division is in the nonprofit space. We work exclusively with nonprofits, mostly charities, but some 501c6, 501c4 type organizations and the various other types of 501cs, but mostly the 501c3 organizations, the charities that are soliciting nationwide and need to register in one or more states, typically in multiple states because their fundraising campaigns cross state borders. At Cogency, as a registered agent company, we also obviously do corporate work and filings for our nonprofit clients as well and act as their registered agent. But really, the majority of what I'm focused on is fundraising compliance for charities. And then also if these charities or other nonprofits are holding events in other states and they're going to be spending a lot of money on hotels or meals or conferences, et cetera, we also offer sales tax exemption filing services. And then finally, when charities are entering into commercial co-venture agreements for the purpose of charitable sales promotions, we will register both the for-profit commercial co-venturer and the charity in the states that require registration for charitable sales promotions. So that's pretty much the long and short of what I do in our space as it relates to nonprofits.
Well, that's a lot of stuff. And obviously, nonprofits get their IRS determination letter at the federal level, but then there's a tremendous amount of state level regulation and oversight, particularly as it relates to fundraising. So obviously, formation, could occur in one state, and then obviously the IRS determination letter comes from the federal level. But I'd love to understand what mistakes nonprofits often make regarding state registrations and sort of state level compliance that they should be watching out for.
It's a great question, Kevin. It's especially confusing for some of the smaller nonprofits that might not have access to financial or legal advice. These organizations quite frequently mistakenly think that they need to register in lots of states or more states than they really are required to. And they also sometimes get confused. You wisely brought up corporate filings and the conducting business aspect of it. Sometimes they may mistakenly think that they need to register to conduct business in a state because they're soliciting in that state. And that couldn't be farther from the truth. Now, there are a couple of exceptions to that rule, namely DC and North Dakota, that they require you to first qualify to conduct business in the state prior to soliciting in the state. And they set it up as a prerequisite. You can't get the charitable solicitation license to solicit in North Dakota or DC without first qualifying to conduct business. And, and that qualification, that foreign corporate qualification filing, then sets up the ongoing obligation of having to renew that every year in North Dakota and every 2 years in DC, and then to appoint a registered agent, which these are all services we provide. But yeah, so for the smaller organizations, they make that mistake thinking that they need to qualify to conduct business when really what they need to do is register to solicit in most states. there are organizations that are smaller because of awareness in the marketplace that they do need to register to solicit, but then they mistakenly think that because they're fundraising online, or because maybe they have a donate now button and have the ability to receive donations from all states, that they need to register to solicit in all states because they have a presence or potentially fundraising in multiple states simply because of that online activity. And that also is generally not true. It doesn't create a need to register in states simply because you have a donate now button on your website. Now, that being said, there's certain things that you need to monitor, and there's certain states that you need to be aware of with respect to a donate now button and online fundraising, where there are specific rules in generally in Colorado, Mississippi, and Tennessee, where you need to pay attention to the amount of donations and the number of donations. And if you cross the thresholds for those three states, then you want to be thinking about registering. And then for other states, I generally say follow the Charleston principles. There's a document out there called the Charleston Principles that provides guidance to charities that when they're fundraising online, when will they need to register? And so it provides two tests. One is a substantial test. So if the donations are large, or they get to be large from the donors within the state, they give an example of 25,000. And it turns out that Colorado, Mississippi, and Tennessee use that exact amount as their substantial threshold. And then the other threshold is repeated and ongoing. So the number of donations matters to a state. In Colorado, Tennessee, or Mississippi and Tennessee, set those numbers at 25, 50, and 100. So you need to be paying attention not only to the amount of money that's coming in, but the number of donations that are coming in. Whereas the Charleston principles say 50 donations. So if you have 50 donations from residents in a state, then as a best practice, you should be registering to solicit in that state. And that's, of course, absent any other type of nexus with the state, or that you're not, in terms of fundraising nexus, that you're not sending letters or emails into the state where you know that the recipients of those letters or emails are in that state, or that you're calling residents or state, or that you're writing for grants in that state. Those are all things outside of an online fundraising presence that would require registration.
That's interesting, and it does dovetail into the question I was going to ask, which related to sort of proactive fundraising emails, right? Which is, in some cases, if a person subscribes to an email newsletter at a nonprofit, the nonprofit may not necessarily always ask the follow-up question of where you're located, right? And so they may not have that information as to the location of the recipient.
Great point, because a lot of times all that's required is just an email, and some will collect the address and city and state, and so in that case, and if you're soliciting and you collected that information, well, you should know, or should have reasonably known, that you're soliciting somebody in that state, and so you have an obligation in terms of record keeping to keep that straight. But yeah, a lot of times it's just an email and you don't know where those emails are going. And so how can you be expected to register in a state if you don't know where those emails are going? Now, what can happen, obviously, as a result, is that if they respond and they donate and they collect that information, then you add that information to your donor data set, and then add them to your mailing list, or add them to other lists, email list, or whatever. Now you're soliciting in the state, and know that you're soliciting, or should have reasonably known that you're soliciting in that state, and that requires a registration.
Right. So it just sounds like they should do their own due diligence, keep track of their own behavior, and sort of understand either when they've crossed the line or when they could be reasonably expected to cross the line within the near future. And at that point, they should give your team a call. Yeah, definitely. Keep accurate records. Obviously, it's something you want to do anyway as a best practice, both from the federal and state record keeping perspective. You want to know who your donors are, and you want to know where they are. And so you do want to keep accurate records and know where they are. Right. Well, clearly the smaller nonprofits have one set of issues to deal with, and it relates to perhaps them crossing that threshold and having to take on the added responsibility of registering. But I'm sure larger nonprofits also make mistakes that are different than the ones that the smaller ones make. Any particular issues that tend to come up over and over again on the larger nonprofit side?
So I guess two things specific come to mind right away. One is that even the larger nonprofits sometimes don't know that they're required to do this, or maybe they do know that they're required, but opt not to.
Mhm.
And sometimes that's kind of a holdover from the pre-internet era, so to speak. It used to be that prior to the internet, that only the largest fundraisers, both in terms of charities, that really registered nationwide.
Right.
The states had limited ability to monitor or regulate the smaller organizations that maybe should have. But I've seen that, there are some holdovers that you would be surprised for their size,
Mhm.
that they're either not registered or not properly registered. And what I mean by that, there are certain categories of large nonprofits that enjoy exemptions from registration. So think hospitals, large hospitals as nonprofits. Think colleges and universities, very large nonprofits. Their related educational foundations, also large. Some houses of worship, large religious houses of worship that think they're exempt because they're a religious organization, but that's not always the case. And so for the larger organizations like those that I've mentioned that are uh, the beneficial position of having exemptions available to them, exemptions from filing these registrations. What happens is that they sometimes erroneously think that they're exempt in states that they're not. And then I've also seen it go the other way where they actually register in states where they actually are an exemption is available to them.
Right.
And so there's gaps for these larger organizations. And so doing a proper, what I just call a gap analysis of like answering a few questions. We have a do-it-yourself tool called CREW. It's an acronym for Charitable Registrations and Exemptions Wizard. And it allows these larger types of nonprofits to answer about 5 questions. And based on their knowledge of where they're registered and or exempt, it will generate a report automatically that tells them, from our perspective, where they need to register, where they qualify for an exemption. And that kind of shows in a color formatted print report where there are discrepancies. So in other words, we're saying there's a registration requirement in, say, this state or that state, whereas they're saying that they're exempt. And then the other side of the coin, they're saying they're registered in a state where we're saying, well, actually you qualify for an exemption. And so between that report and their answers, it automatically shows you a very clear snapshot, one of not only where they're required to register and where they qualify for an exemption, but where they've made mistakes, according to our analysis of what the statutes say.
Well, that
And of
sounds
course,
pretty
should
handy.
qualify this all with not legal advice, not accounting advice, and there's disclaimers in my emails and on CREW and everything that we do. But yeah, so that's one of the things that I see. And then also for larger nonprofits, sometimes if they hadn't been registered nationwide, say they were registered in many states, also mistakenly thinking that they need to ramp it up and register nationwide because of online fundraising. And again, it doesn't necessarily mean simply because you're fundraising online that you need to register, though there are scenarios where you should, and it does lead to the need to register.
Right, right. Yeah, one area that you mentioned in your introduction that I'd love to get a little more clarity on is the commercial co-ventures. Obviously, to the extent that sometimes businesses and nonprofits want to collaborate, right, that may trigger a commercial co-venture requirements as it relates to registration. So, what should folks be aware of as it relates to, registration and record keeping for commercial co-ventures?
It's a great question. So the for-profits are required to register as well. It's not just the nonprofits. And this is a type of solicitation. That a charitable sales promotion is a type of solicitation. And it's defined in most of the state statutes as such. And commercial co-ventures, the for-profit side of the equation, are required to register with the state in the same way that the charities are. Fortunately, there are far fewer states that require that for the for-profit. It's 10, 11 in that range, depending on the scope, the geographic scope, and how you're actually conducting the commercial co-venture or the charitable sales promotion. But so, yeah, the for-profit and the charity both need to be aware of a registration requirement. And in some states, it's just a one-time notice. It's just like, for example, Hawaii and New Hampshire, it's just a one-time notice that, hey, this charity has entered into a charitable sales promotion with this for-profit. It's a very simple online notice filing or paper filing. It's very simple to submit. And that's it, you're done. But in most of the states, there are additional requirements. There's an initial registration, in some a renewal, in others a financial report, and or a post-promotion filing. So kind of like after the end of the promotion, detailing the outcome of the campaign, so to speak. So, how much was given, how much product or service was sold, how much is given to the charity. So a post-promotion filing is required in some states. And then in two of the states, Alabama and Massachusetts, bonding is required by the commercial co-venturer. So they need to get a bond in place prior to executing that charitable sales promotion. So yeah, so there's something to be aware of. There's risks both for the for-profit and the nonprofit. And I think the biggest risk would just be reputational risk. You don't want to be the subject of an attorney general's news release that your for-profit organization or your charitable organization was soliciting through a charitable sales promotion that wasn't meeting state requirements.
That's great advice. I would imagine that there must be certain cases where the risk is quite de minimis, and it's not entirely clear that a registration is absolutely required, either due to the structure of the program or just the size of the program. And I'll use Amazon Smile as an example, right? So, affiliate programs like Amazon Smiles. In the case of Amazon Smile, the money actually comes out of a foundation, the Amazon Smile Foundation, yet the product sales occur on the for-profit, Amazon.
Yeah.
But in other affiliate programs, and there are hundreds of them, right? They could be classified as a co-marketing or co-venture.
Cause marketing is what I call it. Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt, but what I was going to get at, that's a type of cause marketing and typically isn't subject to registration under commercial co-venture portion of the statutes, but it is a type of cause marketing, just like like the roundup at the register type thing.
Yeah.
So there's a variety of cause marketing campaigns that you need to be aware of, but it doesn't rise to the level of needing to register as a commercial co-venture. And the same would be true with, like you say, something small. A lot of local charities will team up with a restaurant and a school to support an athletic team or a band or an arts issue, and it's done all in one day. And so there's really no way to register that. Now, again, fortunately, most states don't require the registration. Only 10 or 11 do. A wider number of states, though, do require the charity to report that they're having commercial co-ventures. And when I say report, I mean the ones that rise to the level where the commercial co-venture needs a contract and needs to abide by the state statutes and file themselves. Those are the ones that the charity is going to want to report. And that's in about 25 states. And many of those states want to see a copy of the commercial co-venture agreement between the charity and the for-profit. So it's a wider number of states that require something, but in terms of the commercial co-venture, it's a much smaller number of states.
Interesting, and thanks for the clarification on that. That leads me to my next question, which is, once you start to venture into the either cause marketing or co-venture side of fundraising, then some nonprofits, I think, get a little bit confused about how to classify that revenue, right? Is it UBIT or is it regular donation revenue? And is that another area where they should be sort of properly educated in order to make sure that they're keeping their financials set straight?
Yes, and again, another great question. UBIT concern. If a charity is regularly engaged in a business activity that is not related to their charitable purpose, and sometimes these commercial co-venture agreements could fall into that category and could come across the IRS's radar, so to speak. Fortunately, they don't have many people at the stations looking at on their radar screens. So I would say that the risk is relatively low, but again, you don't want to take a risk with the IRS. So you don't want to regularly engage in and conduct business that is outside the scope of your charitable purpose as a charity. And sometimes getting into these commercial co-venture agreements can be considered engaging in business. And so to limit the exposure or risk in that respect, you want to limit the duration of the campaign. So that way it's not regularly conducted. And then similarly, one of the big risks is on the promotion side, the advertising side. You don't want to promote and advertise the for-profits products and services. Now, it's not to say that you can't promote or advertise the charitable sales promotion itself, or the fact that you've entered into this agreement. The line that you have to draw is you don't want to be an advocate for this for-profit. You don't want to promote their services and products. You don't want to advertise their products and services, because that's definitely going to catch the attention of the IRS, and that's going to raise UBIT concerns, and then potentially a need to file the IRS 990T for unrelated business income. So
Right.
yeah, those are the two biggest things to be concerned about when addressing UBIT and revenue recognition.
Right. In the case, I'm just curious, because you got me thinking about sort of public broadcasting, and you got me thinking about the nonprofit publishers, right? And in their case, obviously, advertising is core to their mission, because they're producing content, and the advertising supports the production of that content. And, when I was a kid, and I grew up in the New York area with, Channel 13, WNET, there wasn't advertising per se, but there was promotional consideration messaging, right, that preceded a lot of the shows. And then even some of the shows that they or WGBH out of Boston would produce would have this sort of pre-roll ad that would show up because of the either the foundation that created it or Exxon Mobil at the time used to produce a lot of stuff. So would you say that would potentially trigger that advertising revenue as UBIT, or because it's integral to the mission of the organization, it would typically just be considered traditional revenue?
Yeah, so if I hear what you're saying correctly, I think recognition of a sponsor, or recognition, like funding by X corporation,
Right.
that is that is supporting, say, public television or something. Those announcements and that recognition is fine.
Yeah.
That's not seen as promotion. It's when you get into, buy this kind of truck or buy this kind of car, and you're advertising and promoting that for-profit. That's where you're crossing the line. And what can then happen is that revenue from that campaign could be considered taxable.
Right.
And if you're doing too much of this and you're regularly conducting it, engaging in business outside of your charitable purpose, it could put your IRS tax exemption at stake. And again, fortunately, the IRS, there aren't too many actors out there that are doing this, none that I'm aware of, and most do it correctly. But that's definitely, when it comes to the marketing side and the promotion side, as a for-profit or even as a nonprofit, you just want to be aware that a charitable sales promotion really is about branding, recognition for both the charity and the for-profit. It's to boost sales for the for-profit. It's to boost donations to the charity and awareness for their cause. So it's really a win-win all the way around. But at the same time, you don't want to be promoting the product or service that the for-profit is they're selling simply because they've engaged in a commercial co-venture agreement or charitable sales promotion with your organization.
Yeah, you mentioned roundup type as another form of cause marketing, sort of roundups, which could be at the point of sale, right, or it could be digital point of sale roundups,
or likes and shares or retweets. I've seen those campaigns as well.
Right. Are there certain levels of disclosure that you think are prudent in those cases where there's going to be roundup level fundraising sort of facilitated by a merchant, I guess you'd call them?
Yes, definitely. The state statutes are very clear about the disclosures. both on a charitable sales promotion and for calls marketing in general. The minimums are, you want to identify the charity that's going to benefit. You want to identify the for-profit. You want to identify the dollar and percentage amount per transaction that's going to be donated as a result of the roundup or the sale of a product or service. Want to mention the purpose of the donations, and if applicable, maybe the dates of the promotion, the starting and ending dates, and then maybe a minimum and a maximum donation amount. And that sounds like a lot of information, but I actually printed something today in preparation for this, and I'll share this with you. It's an example of a charitable sales promotion disclosure statement, and it's by Shaquille O'Neal, who is a Papa John's franchisee in the Atlanta area. So it's got a picture of Shaquille O'Neal, and it says, "Everyone loves pizza. Pizza loves everyone. It's pizza with a purpose." And then here's the disclosure statement. It's really short and sweet, but it meets all the requirements of every state statute. And it says, "From now until October 24, Papa John's will donate $1 for every shakaroni sold to the Papa John's Foundation, a 501c3 organization that supports communities. Regardless of the amount of shakaroni sold, the Papa John's Foundation will donate $250,000 to UNCF, $500,000 to the Boys and Girls Clubs, and $10,000 to the Baltimore Hunger Project." So it's identified the charities, it's identified the purpose, it's identified the start and end dates, it's identified the amounts going to be donated, the amount per product sold with a maximum amount.
Right.
And so, it met all of those disclosure requirements in 2 short sentences.
Right.
I've seen much smaller typeface than what appears on the website for Shaq's Papa John's restaurants on its website and on its pizza boxes. But as long as it's on there somewhere and it's in a reasonable amount in terms of the typeface, usually like 10-point font, just a sentence or 2. Usually it's going to be 2 sentences with all that information, but you can get it done with just 2 sentences.
Interesting. I thought of a follow-up question on UBIT. From folks I've spoken to in the nonprofit community, it seems like sometimes they're extremely fearful of UBIT, right? So it's like they don't want any at all. But yet others seem to have the opinion like, well, it's even if I have to pay the taxes on it, if it's incremental, I could use the revenue, right? And so it seemed like from what you said before, there's some sort of line that you could cross where if it suddenly becomes regular and beyond a certain either percentage of overall revenue, that might raise the ire of the IRS. But it doesn't seem like nonprofits should necessarily fear it. They should just properly account for it.
Properly account for it and recognize the revenue correctly. Yeah. The problem with that is that you're tracking something separately. You're also filing an IRS 990T, so it's another IRS filing on top of the one that you're already doing. So you're involving your accountant more, you're engaging them more. So your costs in terms of compliance and record keeping goes up. I think that's where the larger concern comes into play. Not the fear of what the IRS might do to us, but just the inconvenience of the record keeping and the recognition. And then also, because these campaigns are oftentimes limited in scope and duration, it's like, is it really worth it? Maybe we'll just take our risks and see if anyone says anything,
Right.
The risk tolerance is part of the issue as well. And I think a lot of people will take more risk as long as their reputation isn't called into question in any way.
Right. Well, there's some concern economically at the moment about, obviously, with increasing inflation and potentially a recession coming along, that individual donations may be flowing at a lower rate. And so some nonprofits are sort of potentially trying to think about ways to make up for that through corporate philanthropy, cause marketing programs,
corporate sponsorships,
and corporate social responsibility programs, which sort of overlap with the corporate philanthropy to some extent. Given the fact that there may be a renewed interest in that as individual donations may dry up, any recommendations or suggestions for nonprofits that will be sort of moving in that direction for the first time?
So first, it's very astute of you to recognize that. That is the trend over the last couple of years. Obviously, individual donations is the biggest component of giving in the United States. But over the last few years, there have been fewer people giving. Now, fortunately, the ones that are giving at a higher level. And
Right.
so the donations aren't really going down, but there is concern by the fact that the number of donors and the percentage of those individuals that are giving is starting to fall off. And
Mhm.
so that's a trend, and that it's going in that direction. So there's concern there, and very wisely so. Charities are looking for other streams of revenue and ways to promote and fundraise. And so, like you said, corporate sponsorships, some are starting to look into grants where they've never looked into grants before, and then cause marketing and charitable sales promotions. I would say just be aware of what's required of your organization when you enter into these agreements, especially as it relates to commercial co-ventures and charitable sales promotions. The for-profit is likely going to need some coaching if they haven't done it. And so they're going to want to involve an attorney or CPA that's familiar with, or a service company like ours that knows what is required. Now, because we're not attorneys, can't write the contracts, but we know what's required in terms of the content in the contracts and what the states require, state to state, where the promotion is occurring. So I think what they really just need to be aware of is that know what's required of you in terms of compliance on the state side, and then don't get into trouble with the IRS. And if you do need to file the 990T, just make sure that you do that.
Right.
Is that what you're going for?
Yeah, that's the
Yeah.
main gist.
We during the pandemic, we noticed that more and more charities were looking into obviously digital fundraising more than ever
Mhm.
before. So
Right.
that was growing explosively anyway, but that just kind of lit a fire under the whole, in terms of digital marketing and digital fundraising. It exploded during the pandemic. And more people looking into getting assistance from fundraising consultants or professional fundraisers. That can impact registration for charities, but then also looking into charitable sales promotions as a viable way to get their brand out there and get their purpose out there via a partnership with a for-profit. And if it's a nationwide or a very large for-profit that has a lot of brand and name recognition, having a charity tied to it, the benefits are obvious for both.
Right. Absolutely. So in addition to the pizza promotion that you mentioned earlier, are there any favorite either co-venture or cause marketing promotions or charitable sales promotions that you particularly like, where you felt like they did a great job?
So I've always liked the Subaru campaigns. It's what's it called? Share the Love is what it's called. Share the Love campaign, or Share the Love event. And what Subaru does is that when you buy a Subaru vehicle, they will donate, I think it's $250 to one of 4 nationwide charities.
Mm-hmm.
But in addition to that, they work with over 1,000 charities nationwide in local markets. So you can designate a local charity that you work with or know or are fond of, or you can pick one of the 4 nationwide charities that they've entered in. So they've done a good job in terms of partnering with the right type of nonprofits as well, in my opinion. I won't mention them, or I can if you want, but they've partnered with the right types of organizations in the 4 and nationwide ones, especially. And they've done their due diligence, and they file and they comply with the law. And so I've always been rather fond of Subaru's campaign with their charitable sales promotions.
Great. Yeah. I mean, I had built the cause marketing platform a bunch of years ago, started almost 20 years ago, and it ended up becoming the inspiration for Amazon Smile, but it was a for-profit venture called We Care. And I remember one of our bigger partners was the ASPCA, and my recollection is that
That's
was one of the
4.
Subaru partner brands, and that I think other animal brands might have been in there, but I can't recall the other nonprofits. So feel free to mention them.
So yeah, it's Meals on Wheels, a Park Foundation, and Make-A-Wish Foundation. So you think animals, children's, parks, and feeding the hungry. So
Mhm.
all very noble causes, all very well-known nationwide charities that most of their buyers are going to have some sort of an affinity towards one of them. And then again, if not one of those four nationwide charities, they work with many of the local charities in every market that they sell. And so obviously there'll be a charity that is near and dear to somebody locally, if not one of the nationwide ones.
Yeah, one fascinating fact we discovered when we were running We Care, long before I started giving forward as a 501c3, was that people had categories of nonprofits that they were extremely passionate about, but their brand loyalty within the category was sort of subject to some nudging, right? And so for a lot of folks, if they were animal enthusiasts and you said, hey, I've got $1,000 here, do you really mind whether it goes to Humane Society, ASPCA, North Shore Animal League, or Save a Pet? They're like, yeah, those are all good, right? Now, some of them may have had some strong preferences within that set, but a bunch of them seem to be like, no, as long as it's a reputable, good brand animal cause, I'm good with that. And then other people might be the same way about veterans. And so if you said, well, it's disabled American veterans or wounded warrior or whatever, and you gave them a choice, they'd be like, yeah, those are all good, right?
Mhm.
Same thing with children, right? If it was care.org versus Save the Children, et cetera. So there was a willingness of the consumer to sort of pick a category and be extremely passionate about the category. But then at the individual brand level, there was sort of switching behavior, just like for me, Coke, Pepsi, like I'm willing to switch,
Yeah.
right? And so there's similar dynamic we noticed within the nonprofit categories. Any thoughts there as to sort of
Yeah. Just
if that's consistent with what you've seen?
yeah, it's the psychology of it. It makes sense. Typically people are passionate about a specific cause, maybe not a specific organization.
Right.
And so they identify, if the organization identifies with what they are passionate about, they're okay with it. So that kind of makes sense to me. Obviously,
Right.
there might be a favorite, and they say, well, I'd really prefer for it to go to this one. But if it's going to the general cause that they're passionate about, that to me that makes sense.
So, final question, just any advice for nonprofits going into next year, which nobody knows if it's going to be a recession year for 2023 or not. But certainly it's been a wild several years with the pandemic already. But for them to sort of prepare for next year, any recommendations that you would put forth?
Well, I'd say, if your digital footprint isn't a big part of what you do, it should be. I know many charities have already gone in that direction and continuing to going in that direction, but digital is going to fuel the engine for giving going into the future. It's a generational thing. I'm not saying give up on your direct mail campaigns. They're still quite effective. But make sure you're investing heavily in digital would be one of the things that I would say. And then, look to diversify your streams of income in terms of fundraising and revenue in terms of fundraising, whether that's a charitable sales promotion or grants, but just look for new ways, 21st century ways to bring in those donations and have a presence in terms of your digital marketing and fundraising. I know that donors really appreciate the check-ins, and they appreciate the videos, and they appreciate the the messages that they're getting in those videos. It's spurring more giving, and so the fact that individuals are giving, fewer individuals are giving, you want to be able to maximize that kind of the peer-to-peer type situation where you're fundraising. And so you might have an advocate or champion that's aware of your organization, but their influence in terms of their networks can be it can be leveraged, so to speak. And so I think it's important to understand that. So don't put away the more traditional methods of fundraising. If you're doing those will be around for quite a while. But make sure you're investing heavily in digital, in my opinion. I don't think I'd find too many people that would disagree with me in terms of that, and would welcome an additional comment or two from you about what I may have missed in terms of that answer.
No, actually, it dovetails perfectly with my personal mission. I mean, Giving Forward is a nonprofit that builds cause marketing platforms and other similar fundraising platforms for nonprofits that they would not typically be able to build for themselves, right? And as a 501c3 ourselves, our mission is to empower additional forms of fundraising, particularly in situations like cause marketing, where you can create a win-win scenario between a brand, a nonprofit, and the consumer, where they all sort of walk away with warm fuzzies, or in some cases, money as well as warm
Right.
fuzzies. So,
Well,
yeah,
I'm sorry to interrupt, but we're trending towards a good way to close this on the warm fuzzies and good news. But I'd be remiss if I didn't mention to this to you, Kevin, especially given your organizations with Giving Forward. Are you aware of California AB 488, which is the new platform fundraising legislation that kicks into effect on January 1 of next year, and it requires platforms and platform charities to register with the state of California. So we
yes,
talked a lot about registration, but we didn't talk about that at all.
I am aware of it. It's been interesting because I've been watching Omaze and Prizio, which they've been trying to decide and California's been trying to decide do they want them to register exclusively as fundraising organizations and also as platforms. And essentially, I think those have been part of the catalysts for that law to be created, as well as obviously some third-party fundraising platforms as well that touch the money, right? There's sort of different kinds of fundraising organizations. Some touch the money on their way through, similar to like a PayPal, but are really just like a merchant service, and then some touch the money in different ways, the way Omaze and Prizio do. So yeah, I have been aware of that, and it's on my to-do list actually. Okay. So thanks for reminding me.
The final regs will be out soon, and the forms will be out soon. And obviously, none of it's applicable until January 1. But something for your organization and other platform charities and platform fundraisers to be aware of, that this is something they're going to need on their radar.
Yeah, that's a great reminder. And yeah, it just happened to have been on my radar because of, the area that we're getting ready to play in, which is something that's, just, we had an MVP that we just finished, and now we're on version 2.0 of something that is most likely going to trigger that registration requirement. So thanks for the reminder for myself and for everyone else who needs the reminder.
Problem. And I hate to be the potential bearer of bad news, but it is kind of a sticky subject that has not been addressed in any way. And the current statutes, charitable solicitation statutes, don't adequately address it. So this is California's attempt to address it. I wouldn't be surprised if New York addresses it next, and then you got the whole East Coast, West Coast thing going on, and then certain states fill in the middle. Mm-hmm. And so it could be a situation down the road where we're looking at multiple state filings being needed, unfortunately, in terms of regulation, but in terms of, kind of preventing fraud and making sure that we don't have bad players in the marketplace. In terms of consumer protection, I think it could potentially be a good thing.
Yes, well, absolutely. I mean, we all understand that the regulators' hearts are in the right place. And as nonprofits, I think we sometimes grumble, even though we understand that their hearts are in the right place. And, it's a tailwind for you guys. So I guess congratulations on the surge in business you should expect to see next year.
Yeah, I guess I'll be able to add one more service to the list
exactly.
after the start of next year.
Right, absolutely. So thanks, Ron, so much for joining me to have this sort of conversation about fundraising and charitable registrations across the United States. Any comments on things globally, or are you guys just really more of a U.S. centric helper?
So Cogency Global does operate internationally. We have a London, a Hong Kong, and a Singapore office. And we do corporate filings and corporate compliance and searches in most countries around the world. Not the charitable registration or tax exemption filings in other countries, but we have attorneys and CPA contacts in all countries that can assist with it when and where it's absolutely needed. There aren't many organizations that are registering internationally that say are exclusively here in the US, unless they have some sort of a presence in another country and are already established there, either operationally or fundraising or both.
Right.
We can provide some guidance in that respect. And then, like I say, on the corporate side, we can do some of the work.
But it sounds like you guys are good folks to know, both on the for-profits doing the cause marketing or CSR work, but also for the nonprofits. So thanks so much for joining me, Ron.
Appreciate it very much, Kevin. I had a good time today.
Likewise.
Kevin Lee's Power Marketing is available on all your favorite podcast networks. Kevin loves helping businesses excel at marketing. Having marketing challenges? Just like Santa in the Miracle on 34th Street, if Kevin can't help you, he'll know someone who can. Find him on LinkedIn, subscribe, or follow.